As Taylor found additional acquisition and startup opportunities, Glen would need to move leaders from North Mankato to these new locations across the country. This is the perfect example of opportunity and security. Employees who were willing to move and ready for a challenge were responsible for the growth of these new businesses. Glen would need to carefully select leaders that he trusted who had the experience and skills for the job.
One of our projects was to grow the company. And we could do it a number of ways. We could buy a failing company and get it cheap, or we could do a startup. I like the startups, and we did that in a number of locations where we went out there and just built a building or rented a building. Then we'd go back to our workforce and we'd move about 7 people in just about every case out there to the new location.
I think it was probably 1976, 77, Glen sent out a questionnaire asking managers, if we have an opportunity to acquire anything, would you be willing to move? So I filled it out. I told my wife, and she said, yes, I will move, but I will not move to the West Coast, or I will not move to the East Coast. So in 1978, Glen called me into his office and said, do you want to move to New Jersey? I said, yes. He goes, I think you better go home and talk to Mary Jo. I said, no, we'll move. So I went home and she agreed and we moved. And it was a fantastic opportunity.
After I made some errors in talking people into moving, I found out that immediately I would ask the spouse to come in, and as a couple, they would sit down with me and we would talk about the move. For me to move them out there was fairly easy because it was really based upon trust. The person that I moved out there didn't have to have all the skills, but if I trusted them, and I trusted them just because of the reports they made previously or they budgeted. So typically what we had in our company was a weekly report, and they were very used to turning in a weekly report. The weekly report said how many orders would come through, how many hours they had in each of the departments they utilized that. We would sit down and make a budget and put it together. And quite frankly, I didn't have to communicate with them unless they were off that report. So sometimes they were better than the report. And of course, that only was a call to congratulate them and thank them for doing a good job. But sometimes they got behind. And then we wanted to talk about. A lot of times there was some very good reasons that they were behind. And that's all I had to know, is did they understand why things weren't going as good as we had anticipated? And they usually knew. But my whole relationship with just about all of our leaders, I would just get back to that word of trust. If you trust someone, then even if they make a mistake, you know they'll correct it and they'll do it for the right reason.
Creating culture and a strong workforce takes time. John and Glen shared with me how they responded to a possible union by building relationships and trust with the employees and sharing their goals and vision for the company.
So I went out in 78 in the spring. I was out there for 3 months. My family moved out in July. And that October, we got a letter from the National Labor Relations Board saying they wanted to unionize the plant. And I go, oh my gosh. So I'm like 29 years old and I'm running this company and I came out of production and it's, this is going to be a challenge.
I think it starts with me. I have to believe it. I have to be consistent. So that's one of the reasons that I spent so much of my time in those early years of going out to the plants and doing what we call the employee meetings. And we would sit in a circle and I would share stories with them and how we really wanted to treat employees. And then I always opened it up at the last part to questions. And I think that's a lot of times where they would dig in and they would ask the questions, well, why should we trust you and stuff like that. And I would said, I don't expect you to believe in me because I said it. Look at what I've done. What I've done in the past is probably what I'm going to do in the future. So if you like what I've done in the past, we've grown each year, how we've treated people and stuff like this there. Why wouldn't we do the same in the future. If we've been successful in the past, we're probably going to be successful in the future.
The bottom line was, a week before the vote, the employees decided to pull back on it. It never went to a vote. But that took a lot of talking, a lot of individual meetings, and just said, you know, I just kind of sold myself. I said, hey, I just came out here. Give me a chance. And they did.
We talked about profits instead of saying that, that you have to make profits because we just got to make profits. I said, no, the only reason you want to make profits is for yourself. You make profits, and what are we going to do with it? And we would talk about it just directly, and that profits were, number one, you know, to buy new equipment, buy new software, give them tools so they can do their jobs better. If they can do their jobs better, that means we can give them some fringe benefits. They all wanted that. We could give them a pay increase. Why? Because they're more productivity. But I always never try to skip around and sidetrack a difficult question like that. But they were always about the same questions. It was easy for me because I knew the answer. It was what I've done in the past is what we're going to do in the future.
Coming from Mankato, I mean, you worked 6 days a week and till 5 o'clock on Saturday if you needed to. And if it snowed, you went to work. So the first year I was in New Jersey, there was a storm coming up the East Coast, and it was called a nor'easter. I didn't know what a nor'easter was. And they were forecasting snow. And people start calling in. I go, no, we're working. You got to get in here and work. We're not closing the company. This was like at maybe 7:30 in the morning when it didn't look too bad. By 11 o'clock, we probably had about 6 or 8 inches of snow on the ground. Couldn't get out of the parking lot. I was in the parking lot pushing cars out so they could get on the street and taking people home. So I learned my lesson what a nor'easter was.
One of the reasons he had a good workforce is the district had a agreement with students that were seniors in high school that the students could go out and get a part-time job, but they had to keep their grades at a certain level. If they didn't keep their grades at a certain level, they would go back to the employer and have the student stop working and go back and get their studies up there. And we found out they enforced it. Well, we found out that so many of those students, after they graduated from high school, stayed with the company. I don't think there's any magic to it. I just think friendship is really important. Trust is really important. I think when they tell me what they liked about me is that they knew I trusted them. They use that word a lot, and they said they liked the freedom that they had in running their company because they knew I trusted them. They knew they made mistakes, but they knew that the mistakes wasn't going to change anything as far as their opportunities. I think they all knew that, like I had shared with them, we learn a lot from our mistakes, and we just don't want to repeat them.